Hey, this is Stuart at creativeXP, and thanks for joining me for episode 3 of my DM-StormD map build for the original Unreal tournament. In this video, I'm building upon my initial block out to add more structure and intent to each area of the level, turning this basic block out into this. So picking up where we left off in the previous episode, there were a few things that we identified that needed adjustment. Firstly, we need to improve the flow around the tunnels and overflow areas to make sure they are being utilised more frequently by players. We need to modify the connection between the siphon and chamber rooms, finding an alternative solution for these temporary ramps. And we want to start adding more structural forms to each room so that they start to depict the intended themes for each area. So let's start with the chamber. Now looking at the current space, we can see that there are effectively two directions of movement, up and down the room and crossing left to right via the bridge or passing between the siphon and tunnels entrances at the lower level. Each direction of movement can also be divided into two clear channels. So as we know, we can't really use this left to right channel because these ramps are blocking the player's movement. They are also making the transition between channel directions more difficult than I would like. Now we can't remove them without lowering the access points to the adjoining rooms, but what if we extended them to be more of an integrated feature of the space? That could help, but it would mean changing the bridge supports as well. Let's remove the central pillar here and move the remaining supports inwards. This introduces an additional third channel of movement up and down the chamber that can also give the room a clearer structure. Here is an example of a sewer in Hong Kong, which should help you visualize what this could look like. The central channel handles the flow of water, while the stairs provide a clear channel for movement up and down either side. In our case, we can make this new central channel lower than the other two to handle the flow of water in our map. Then we can add a new bridge to provide the left to right channel we originally wanted to improve. The elevation change is going to limit some lateral movement between the channels, but I'm hoping that this will also make the action a little less chaotic while still providing plenty of options during engagements inside the chamber. Now let's jump to the editor and we can see how this takes shape. So as a reminder, the central chamber here is where we have our storm drain pit that is going to be the focal point of the map. As part of the planned changes to introduce the new third channel, I've started to block in some simple steps on either side of the room to test the space required to support this. I've also had to lower the slopes here to ensure that there is enough space for the run of stairs from top to bottom. You can see the difference thanks to the item pickups, which are now floating at the height of the old ground. So we can see that we now have the general structure in place as shown in the design sketch earlier. I've widened the stairs to give players more room for movement and shortened the depth of the steps to smooth the camera jittering as players run up and down them. We also have the new bridge in place connected to either staircase to create the new path connecting the tunnels and siphon areas. Moving on again, and the first thing you might notice is that I've actually changed the original bridge structure so that it now has this hump. I realised after adding the new bridge at the lower level that the original bridge had lost some of its prominence in the room. This also gave me an opportunity to try out some new bridge supports in an effort to replace the central column we had to remove. This was providing the parallax effect that we wanted to shorten the combat range from certain angles in here. It doesn't quite work in its current form, but I think this is one to return to later once I've settled on the actual shape of the bridge. I've started to play with some shapes to form the central channel that water is intended to flow down towards the storm drain. It's very flat at the moment and I'll need to continue experimenting with the subtract tool to create a suitable structure that looks right and allows players to easily traverse. Looking at the scale reference model beneath the new bridge here, you can get a sense of how tall the room is and how many different vertical layers there is in such a narrow space now. This is starting to make each level of the room feel more disconnected, whereas before with the constant slope it was less noticeable. I think I want to relook at the height changes I made earlier to the lower level around the pit mouth, which could also help shorten these stairs which are currently too high and steep to be comfortable to navigate. Okay, this has taken a little bit of work. I've had to play around with the subtract brushes quite a lot and find something that I was happy with. But first things first, I've got rid of that horrible flat trough that I had before. Reintroduced a bit of that slope, incorporated the chamfering as part of the channel a lot more now. I've also restored the height around the mouth of the storm drain pit, and I think this has helped in a number of different ways. It's reduced the amount of steps here, so this is a much more shorter run of stairs. It doesn't feel as high up for the player to be traveling between these two levels. They feel much more connected now. Also, this connection on the stairs is going to be smoother to navigate. It also means that the entrance to the overflow is at the correct height again. But the main thing I'm really happy with about this is by raising the floor up here, that's given me a little bit more geometry to work with. And what I've done with that is, you can see I've created this chamfer effect around the mouth of the storm drain as well. This makes the mouth of the pit just feel that much more imposing without actually reducing the playable space in here. You know, players can still run around on these sloped edges here, but it does add a little bit more risk to fighting around this area now. And it, apart from anything else, the storm drain just feels huge now in this room. The bridge is still pretty prominent, but the storm drain is the kind of focal point of the room now, which is as it should be. And I'm really happy with how this has turned out. So the room as a whole still needs a bit of work, but you know, I don't want to be taking the block out too much further at this point. I want to move on to another room and not spend all my attention on the chamber right now. So now's a good time to take a look at the overflow and do something about this long box room that we've currently got. Now, if you remember, the overflow area is where we will hopefully have part of our level's trap interaction, in the form of a large set of doors that can be opened to unleash a torrent of water, flushing any unsuspecting players into the storm drain pit and to their deaths. As part of that, the pit now has a pool of gross water at the bottom, and I've set it up with a trigger to kill any hapless players unlucky enough to fall in. So the first part of our deadly trap is now working as intended. I've also modified the tunnel shape a bit based on some of our reference images, to create a smooth channel for water to flow unimpeded thanks to the shape of these walls, which should also prevent players getting snagged when the trap activates. Next thing to do is to create a suitable space to activate the trap. So players need to be able to see into the overflow section to know when to trigger the trap or not. Plus, it's not much fun if you can't see your victims getting flushed down the drain when you flip the switch. As such, I've added a small corridor that links up to the main overflow section from the chamber, roughly in line with the new bridge, so it appears like a logical maintenance area for any sewer workers that would need access to the switch. I've provided a small recess here to house the switch, which I'll implement in the future. And the position of this is intentionally placed to ensure that players interacting with the switch can see into the overflow section towards the doors, but are also hidden from any players potentially camping in the overflow tunnel that you want to flush out. I think what I'll do now is I'll make a start on the actual tunnels that are going to be feeding the water into this overflow trap area. So to begin with this area, I've gone in and removed the old block out that we had before. And that's because I wanted to give myself some space to work with, as I start at the top of the room with this corridor that's going to descend down into the lower section of the room. So if I just take you up to there via the bridge, you can see I've got the tunnel in place now, and you should be able to see my builder brush here, which kind of reveals the shape of the tunnel that I've gone with. And something I wanted to do here was have the room below gradually reveal as players descend these stairs. Now, as this time-lapse shows, the way I did this was using the 2D shape tool to create a progressively taller segment of the corridor as a single curved piece. I then had to carefully rotate each segment into place to make sure that there were no gaps between the steps before I subtracted the shape. I'm not sure if this was the best way to create this structure, but when I tested it, there didn't seem to be any dreaded BSP leaks in the level. For now, at least. So this spiral staircase is going to be connected to the new room that I've created here, which is going to be where water initially enters the sewer system before filtering into different areas. As such, I want this room to be made up of a large basin with tunnel connections coming and going from the room to create the structure of the space, similar to this reference image. I've been playing with different shape subtractions to create the basin and channel inlets where water enters the system. I'll then create further tunnels that will descend to the lower sections of the chamber and overflow areas, providing the connections to these rooms for players to navigate. Okay, I'm starting to feel a little bit better about this now. I definitely made things harder on myself by wanting the tunnel to pass under the spiral staircase that I created before. It meant that this wall needed to be on a 45-degree angle to everything else, just to make sure that it passed under the stairs here. Despite this, I've managed to settle on an arrangement of shapes to create this basin area by combining different segments and subtracting them to provide the channels for the water flow. Something that I'm still tweaking is the depth of the basin though, and how that affects player movement as they run up and down the slopes of the channel, as it needs to be smooth when entering and exiting the space. So in the end, I've settled for a hybrid approach to the basin walls, which you can see here, with hard edges in some spots like this, and smoother slopes like this in the areas where I want players to traverse in and out of the basin. I've also added these steps as an extra affordance for players, but to also hint at another maintenance access when the water levels are low for a bit of additional in-world logic. Speaking of, I decided to add a little bridge crossing over the basin, again as a valid path for workers to pass over the tunnels if water levels are high, but it also provides an additional traversal option for players to move through the room now. As part of that, I have had to increase the depth of the channels a little bit as well, just as part of providing that bridge. We can see our scale reference here. Make sure that there's enough head clearance just to allow players to jump if they're under the bridge as well. But yeah, I'm happy with this now, so I'm going to start connecting the tunnels to the other rooms. Okay, so we've got our first tunnel connection between the tunnels here down into the maintenance area connecting to the overflow area. So this is where our switch was before to open the overflow doors. Connects to the maintenance tunnel into this little area where I've created a runoff for the water to descend into this pit below. This can almost be like a filtration system of some kind, very rudimentary with the grill, but it also allows workers to walk around here without falling into the pit itself. And now we just need another tunnel connected here on the angle that's going to be descending down to the other doorway into the overflow tunnels. Here we go, I've added the second tunnel that will be filling the reservoir behind the trapdoors in the overflow. Looking at it here, you can see it runs downward at an angle, passing underneath the curved stairs above. Although this was initially a bit of a pain to build, I think the results are worth it to create something with a bit more interest and not just a square room like we had before. Now this is quite a long tunnel to travel down, and we've got the overflow area at the bottom, so I've intentionally obscured the line of sight from the overflow area to make it hard for players to just camp this entrance for anyone trying to run down the tunnels here. Coming back up to the tunnels, I can still add some more details and context to how the tunnel and overflow operations are going to work connecting these tunnels, but overall I'm happy with how this room has come along. Separating the upper corridor and stairs from the rest of the room has definitely helped give the room a clearer purpose, I think, but also it reduces the amount of angles that players need to be aware of to avoid danger during combat. The tunnel channels still provide elevation changes, and there are a few options for moving through the space in different ways now compared to what we had before. So I think at this point I'm ready to move on to the arches. So here we are with the arches, and this was pretty quick to put in place, but I'm really happy with the results. And it was quite easy to do actually. All I did is I created two similar shapes in the 2D shape creator and then alternated the subtractions. And this allowed me to create this arrangement of pillars with the arch ceilings above to try and recreate some of the shapes that were shown in the reference images for this area before. But I love just the depth it gives to the space, and we've got all these nice little nooks and crannies now where we can start to put some of the item pickups, potential spawn locations. So yeah, I think this has come along really nicely, and it was, as I say, pretty quick to do. Something I might have to look at is, funnily enough, I've got the sniper rifle here, but this line of sight here is even longer than the problems we were trying to solve in the chamber before. So might need to have a little think about how I can try and bring that combat range on a little bit. I think the fact that we've got this little dip here is helping. It creates a little break for players to hide and dodge anybody trying to snipe at the other end of the tunnel here. But I might need to playtest this and just see how that actually affects the gameplay. But otherwise, really happy with how this has turned out. So I can now move on to the Siphon area, which is going to be through this archway here. So to begin with, I've got the basic shell in place. Look in the top-down view here, you can see I've segmented it into 3 different shapes, just to kind of get the overall structure of the room in place. I've created a new internal corridor here as part of that. This just mirrors the shape of the corridor on the opposite side, so you can kind of see the shape here matches the shape here, just to try and bring a little bit of connection in terms of the architectural styles running through here. Another thing I've looked at is really opening up the access point to the lower level of the chamber here. It's much more prominent, but also it's less of a choke point now. So transitioning between these 2 rooms should be a lot easier now, and just got some simple stairs in here to account for the change in height. Next thing to do is add in some of the more detailed structural elements, so the bridge and the staircase that we had before. So here we are then, we've got our final structural elements in place with the stairs and the bridge. We've got the connection to this upper level. But what I've also done is I've added some basic representation of the siphon equipment in the form of these pipes and the large generators and stuff that are going to sit under the bridge itself. This has the added benefit of giving players another opportunity to climb up onto the bridge from this direction. So we don't need to just rely on the stairs now. So this is obviously adding another traversal option for players inside the room, but it's also adding an extra dimension for combat engagements along this length of the room. At the far end of the room here as well, you can see I've added in a little doorway. Just starting to think about creating nooks and crannies like this where we can potentially put player spawn points, item pickups, but apart from anything else, it just helps give a little bit more believability to the space. And these are the types of details that I'm going to start looking to add throughout the rest of the level as well, to make sure that the place feels like somewhere that could actually be inhabited and not just a deathmatch level. So that about covers it for all of the rooms that we have in the level now. Coming back down here, we're back into the chamber. So each room has now had a pass on its structural elements. We've got a bit more intent about the space and how that can affect the gameplay in here. So all that's left to do now is to actually jump in the game and do a full playtest of the latest level changes. So before adding bots, I decided to playtest the level on my own first, just to have a run around and see how these changes have affected the flow of the map. Now, something I overlooked a bit in the chamber is that the changes to introduce the new central channel have also created a dead end. And as I described in my first video in the series, I specifically wanted to avoid dead ends to ensure that players can always be moving forward uninterrupted. Whoops. Well done if you spotted this earlier, by the way. So I ended up toying with a few ideas about how to solve this, but in the end, I decided to create a new connection to the tunnels area here. This is just a simple test to see how it affects the flow, and I'll refine this and many other aspects of the rooms in the future. At least for now, it's removed the dead end, and it provides an alternative route for transitioning between the chamber and tunnels. Moving on to playing the level with bots, and it seems the changes have helped reduce the chaos in the central chamber, though things are definitely more intense in the new tunnels room. Probably due to the confined space and multiple entry points in here. It seems that the large open connection to the arches is also contributing to this chaos, so I'll look at options for separating the combat areas into more contained spaces in the future. I'm happy with the increased movement and use of the tunnel connecting the overflow area, but I think I want to revisit this other smaller tunnel and the maintenance corridor leading to the switch. I'm still not satisfied with the logic of this space for handling the water flow, and it doesn't appear to be a useful connection to move between the rooms here. If anything, it might be worth removing this connection and modifying the space to simplify the tunnels area and address some of these visibility issues I spotted. With this in mind, I think this is a good place to end the episode, and we can return to make these changes and begin focusing on more specific details of the map another time. I'll leave you with a few more comparison shots to show the current progress, and don't forget to comment below if you have any questions or suggestions for the map so far. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time for another episode of the DM-StormD map build.